The Sony ZV E10 Mark II is finally here. We're gonna go through some first impressions today and see if it lives up to the hype. I guess we're even getting a good look at its low light capabilities right now. I mean, this is shot at 8,000 ISO, and how are we looking? And even for a quick stabilization test, this is with the stabilization completely turned off, and we're about to turn it on and see if it makes a big difference. And this is with that active stabilization turned on, a bit more of a crop, but we should be a lot more stabilized. Anyway, let's get into the studio and take a look at this camera a bit closer. And we're back in the studio with the ZV E10 Mark II, and the first thing I want to get into is going to be the camera body. The first thing that I notice is a really substantial and good feeling grip, which coming from the original ZV E10, it was almost like you had to pinch it. It didn't really have much of a grip on there. And what's really crazy is that it's even more of a substantial grip than cameras that are $2,000 from Sony, like the A7C Mark II or the ZV E1, which have pretty terrible grips. ZV E10 Mark II, thumbs up on the grip. The camera body is very plasticky, which at first glance, or when you hear that, you might think that that's going to be as if it feels kind of cheap. I was surprised that even though it is plastic, it actually feels really good. One of my favorite things with this Mark II upgrade is that we're getting the Sony Z battery, which is known for really good battery life, and I was able to get a continuous 4K 30p recording. I got almost 2 hours straight and the battery still had 23% left. So battery life is a huge plus in this camera. From a buttons and dials perspective, I would describe it as it's a blend between really intuitive, not over the top, too many buttons and dials for the beginner. We still have the ability to get some really good customization if you're a little more advanced and know how you want to lay your camera out. Obviously, we're not going to get as many options as some of the pro Sony camera bodies, but it's still really nice. With the ZV E10 Mark II, we also have a complete touchscreen menu, which I have found with some of these newer Sony cameras, the ability to have touch functionality on the menu allows you to have a little bit more flexibility on how many buttons you actually need to customize. Very happy to see that this camera, not surprised, but happy to see that this camera does have the updated Sony menu system, which is a massive upgrade from the original ZV E10, which had the older one that we don't love that one. And with that new menu, we're also getting the video focused menu tab. It does have a very similar on-camera microphone system as the ZV E1, which is a $2,000 camera, in that it has the front, back, omnidirectional AI detection based audio system on the on-camera microphone. Regardless of how good that actually is in terms of those functions, it's still not my favorite from an audio quality perspective. And I do suggest that people get an external microphone regardless, but it is passable and it is usable. But what I was really happy to see is that on this camera, we're getting the digital hot shoe, which allows you to get, they're a little bit pricey, but you can get one of these newer Sony microphones, which are fantastic. I use them all the time. Allows you to connect the microphone to the camera using digital 4-channel audio. Biggest part, if you don't know what that is that you can use your microphone, an external Sony microphone, on the camera without having to plug it in. Sounds like a dumb little thing. It actually is kind of nice. And the size of the camera, it's really small, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It means that, the best camera you have is the one that's with you, and sometimes size of cameras can make it kind of tricky to have them always with you. This thing is tiny, but still having a really good substantial grip and really good battery life, and doesn't feel cheap and really small, but it's a really small camera body in comparison to some of the other Sony cameras. Ultimately, I think that's a good thing. If you're getting something from this video, let me know by giving it a tap on the thumbs up. And while you're down there, let me know in the comments. I'm curious to know, do you have the ZV E10 Mark II already? You thinking about picking it up? Do you have it on pre-order? Or are you thinking about upgrading from your original ZV E10? Okay, getting into the camera's stabilization features. We did look at this a little bit earlier on in the video, but let's talk about it. The in-camera, in-body image stabilization does not exist, but we still do get this active stabilization, which is using digital, it's software as opposed to actual in-camera, in-body image stabilization. Ultimately, what does that mean? We're still getting the ability to stabilize our footage when we're doing something like handheld, and it does a really good job looking at these two clips with stability turned off and then using the active stabilization turned on. Downside while using active stabilization is that it's going to crop in, and you can get a sense of what that crop looks like right here. Crops aren't the worst thing. They do potentially downgrade the image a touch. I'm not noticing that from this camera because it has a really good sensor, but it also means that your lenses, if you're doing particularly like a vlog style shot, that you need to have a lens that's plenty wide enough to make sure that when it crops in, you're still getting the frame that you want. Overall, first impressions with the stabilization of the ZV E10 Mark II, I'm happy with what we're getting for a camera at this price point. And speaking of really good things about this camera at the price point, the autofocus is outstanding. As a solo creator, I have pure confidence that this camera is going to be able to keep focus regardless of what I'm doing. It's incredibly sticky. It's incredibly accurate. It's a huge value point on this camera. It doesn't miss. But what about low light performance? It is a crop sensor camera, so it's not full frame. So naturally, we're going to think that the low light's not going to be all that good. It's not going to outperform a full frame camera, but at those high ISOs, I'm really impressed so far at what this camera is able to produce in terms of a really clean image. At those high ISOs, we tend to get a lot of noise or some color shifting. I think the image looks really good for a camera at this price point at those higher ISOs. From a low light perspective, I think it performs well, which is not surprising. I spent a lot of time low light with the A6700, which is the same exact sensor. From a photography perspective, the camera does not have a mechanical shutter. What that really means is that you have to use the electronic shutter because it's your only option. Those are fine. They're still going to take the photo, but they could have a little bit of banding at times depending on your circumstances. So that is a risk you're going to take with not having a mechanical shutter, but it's not all that common. But the photos that we're getting are still really crisp, really sharp, have fantastic colors and tones to them. A 26 megapixel sensor is the sweet spot in my opinion in terms of being able to crop in and not lose a lot of quality. I've noticed that this camera is really probably more geared toward the video creator, but I think it's going to get the job done for basic thumbnails or just some fun photography. It's very capable, but I do think it's a little bit more video first. Moving into the overall image quality, which is probably the most important thing and probably why a lot of y'all are here. The image quality. Well, the interesting thing is that you've been looking at it this whole time. This is being filmed on the ZV E10 Mark II. I switched it right here. This was the A7C Mark II was filming in the beginning when we got in the studio, and we swapped it out. When I put that I know it's tricky. I put the B-roll over the top. I switched over to the E10 Mark II. You didn't even notice. $2,000 camera, and now I've been filming on the E10 Mark II the whole time. What we're getting with video quality at a camera at this about $1,000 price point is kind of crazy. We're getting 4K, 422, 10-bit color. What does that mean? It means you're going to like how your videos look a lot. The colors and tones look exceptional. We have a Cinetone, a picture profile, desirable little picture profile built into this camera. Can fully utilize S-Log3, which is what I'm recording in right now. Get the ability to install user LUTs. We have log shooting. From a video quality and functionality perspective, this camera is going to suit you whether you're brand new and want to kick it into auto. You're going to like how your videos look. As you start to get a little more advanced, or maybe you already are, you're going to have some functionality from a video perspective that's pretty high end and allow you to dial things in and get a ridiculously high quality. Then you also get slow motion. We get 4K in 60 frames a second. You can do 120 frames a second in 1080, which is nice, but probably going to be using that 4K 60. In 4K 60, you're going to get a 1.1 times crop, which is like next to nothing. Here's what that crop looks like. But let's look at how smooth this 4K slow motion, 60 frames a second footage looks. Let's get this clip all dialed in, make it look good with my brand new video finishing LUTs. I'll put a link for that down below if you're interested. You want to make your videos look like mine, along with a heavy discount. All right, here I come.
Here I come. Oh, here I come. Oh.
This is some really smooth 4K slow motion footage while still maintaining those beautiful colors and tones that we get out of that 422 10-bit color. But again, I'm saying this a lot today, at this price point, this is pretty incredible output. Now, from an overheating perspective, we got a couple things to talk about. Take these overheating tests with a grain of salt because they're definitely a bit random, so keep that in mind. But at least for me, with this first test, I was in 4K, 30 frames a second, in XAVCS at 422 10-bit color, so a pretty common codec and settings that people are going to be using for just a regular like YouTube style video. And I was able to record for close to 2 hours without any overheating warnings. And I had the internal temperature setting set to high, which is something that we should all be doing. Camera's going to be fine. It's not going to like blow up. Anyways, close to 2 hours before I just got bored and turned the test off. Now, if you're out in direct sunlight, you're not going to get those same numbers. And if you're recording in 60 frames a second, for example, you're absolutely not going to get those numbers. But a lot of us aren't recording in 60 frames a second for long format. Next test that I did, I think is the most demanding test on any camera, is I set it up as a live streaming webcam while in 4K 30. We get 4K 30 live streaming in this camera, which is pretty awesome. Is a point I haven't really touched on much. Anyways, I was in 4K 30 using it as a webcam while simultaneously recording that feed to an SD card. That's a lot of demand on the camera, and it's plugged into a USB-C, so that's going to drive more heat. I did get that to shut down in about 40 minutes, which isn't surprising. It's also not something that a lot of people are going to be doing while using it live streaming and recording at the same time. It does tell me that we'll be able to get longer than 41 minutes, probably over an hour if you're just using it as a live streaming setup without simultaneously recording. Based off my first impressions, I think Sony hit an absolute home run with this camera. I think it's going to be really popular. It's going to attract a lot of people. It's an upgrade from the original ZV E10 in almost every single way, besides maybe some live streaming, like overheating, because that original ZV E10, it was almost impossible to get that camera to overheat. But you're also getting a lot more features and functionality and a lot more quality upgrades with this Mark II version. So that might be a bit of a trade-off. It's probably not going to be the best for someone who's doing ridiculously long format live streams. But besides that, I think it's going to attract a ton of people. It's going to be really popular amongst beginner content creators all the way up through advanced. I'll be putting a lot of videos about this camera up on the channel in the very near future. Much more detailed review, a lot of tutorials about the settings and how to get the most out of the camera. So if you don't want to miss those, make sure you head down and subscribe down below. We'd love to have you a part of what we got going on this channel. And if you want to get an idea of what you can expect with a lot of the videos I'm going to be making about this camera, you can check out this video, which is literally every single thing that I put out about the original ZV E10. All right, I'll see you in the next video. Take care. See ya.